We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast. This is Abe Williams, your host. Just me riding solo. I don't know, I might start calling it What's on My Mind as the opening. What's on my mind? Well, we are going to try to set up an Instagram due to a comment on the last podcast that was put out on YouTube. BitChute went down for a little bit today, so we could not put out a video on it, which is fine. We're just riding it out, man, because YouTube, everything's up in the air. It's crazy. I'm getting intel from a lot of different places. I'm getting all sorts of different messages, so I don't know what's going to happen. I don't even know if Biden actually won. I'm going to be straight up. So it's all up in the air right now. But I'm not going to focus on any of that. I'm just going to make my money and work. We did set a date for when we are going to go to the Noah's Ark Museum, where they recreated the Ark. Talked about that a little bit. That's just some personal life stuff. Just been working as usual. I think that's about it, man. Honestly. All right, today's episode is going to be on Indrid Cold, a visitor from Laos. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I know you guys aren't big on alien or ghost stuff, but I do see that the bigger ghost stories or the bigger U.F.O. or alien stories seem to get more views, so I don't know. I try to give you guys what you want, but this one is going to be specifically focusing on the case of Woodrow Derenberger and Indrid Cold, which is a visitor from Laos. I'm going to butcher that word every single time I say it. I guarantee you that. Now, there is a book that Woodrow Derenberger wrote by himself about his visitation, I believe in Point Pleasant, from a visitor from Laos, Indrid Cold. I have looked that book up because I wanted to buy it years ago when I first got introduced into the whole Mothman prophecy from the film and the book, and when I first started getting into it. That book on eBay was running for $1,500, and I'm like, I am not about to spend $1,500 on a book. So sadly, I cannot give you guys the most in-depth information. That's the title of the book, so if you can find it on a PDF format or something like that, Godspeed, good luck. But this might be a two-parter, maybe even a three-parter series on just the account from John A. Keel's words. And like I said, this is Conspiracy Corner Podcast, so I obviously will speak up here and there, and where I am writing solo, I don't have anyone to talk to with me because me and Sammy we work on different shifts and stuff. So sadly, it kind of sucks when it comes to that. But I've seen a lot of other different, solo podcasts and stuff. So I don't know. Let's hear the story. The Cold Who Came Down in the Rain. Woodrow Derenberger is a tall, husky man with close-cropped sandy hair, twinkling blue-gray eyes, and an honest, open face. In 1966, he was in his early 50s, but looked considerably younger. His life had been normal to the point of being mundane. A long succession of modest jobs, hard times, constant movement from one rented house to another, pursuing no particular ambition. Surviving. Feeding and clothing his attractive young wife and 2 children. Now he was working as a salesman for an appliance company and living in a simple 2-story farmhouse in Mineral Wells, West Virginia. So it wasn't Point Pleasant, but I'm sure it was close. It was a good time in his life. At 7 p.m. on November 2nd, 1966, he was heading home in his panel truck after a long, hard day on the road. The weather was sour, chill, and rainy. As he drove up a long hill outside of Parkersburg on Interstate 77, a sudden crash sounded in the back of his truck. He snapped on his interior lights and looked back. A sewing machine had fallen off the top of a stereo, but there didn't seem to be any real damage. A car swept up behind him and past him. Another vehicle seemed to be following it. He eased his foot on the accelerator. He had been speeding slightly and thought it might be a police car. The vehicle, a black blob in the dark, drew alongside him, cut in front, and slowed. Woody Derenberger gaped in amazement at the thing. It wasn't an automobile, but was shaped like an old-fashioned kerosene lamp chimney, flaring at both ends, narrowing down to a small neck and then enlarging in a great bulge in the center. It was a charcoal gray. He slammed on his brakes as the object turned crossways, blocking the road, stopping only 8 or 10 feet from it. A door slid open on the side of the thing and a man stepped out. I didn't hear an audible voice, Woody said later. I just had a feeling. Like I knew what this man was thinking. He wanted me to roll down my window. The stranger was about 5 to 10 inches tall, 5 feet 10 inches tall, with long, dark, combed hair straight back. His skin was heavily tanned. Grinning broadly, his arms crossed and his hands tucked under his armpits, he walked to the panel truck. You will hear the kitty in the background, so you'll have to bear with me. Either turn it off or don't. You'll have to get over it. 'Tis what 'tis, as the Irish say. Alright, so the stranger was about 5 feet 10 inches tall, with long dark hair combed straight back. His skin was heavily tanned. Grinning broadly, his arms crossed and his hands tucked under his armpits, he walked to the panel truck. He was wearing a dark topcoat. Underneath it, Woody could see some kind of garment made of glistening greenish material, almost metallic in appearance. Do not be afraid, the grinning man said. The grinning man did not speak aloud. Woody sensed the words, so he's using like telepathy essentially. We mean you no harm. I come from a country much less powerful than yours. He asked for Woody's name. Woody told him, My name is Cold. I sleep, breathe, and bleed even as you do. Mr. Cold nodded toward the lights of Parkersburg in the distance and asked what kind of place it was. Woody tried to explain it. It was a center for business and homes, a city in his world. Cold explained, such places were called quote-unquote gatherings. While his telepathic conversation was taking place, the chimney-shaped object ascended and hovered some 40 or 50 feet above the road. Other cars came along the road and passed them. Cold told Woody to report the encounter to the authorities, promising to come forward at a later date to confirm it. After a few minutes of aimless generalities, Cold announced he would meet Woody again soon. The object ascended, the door opened. Cold entered it, and it rose quickly and silently into the night. When he got home, Derenberger was in a very distraught state. His wife urged him to call the Parkersburg police. They seemed to accept his story without question and asked if he needed a doctor. The next day he was questioned at length by the city and state police. The story appeared in the local press and on the radio and television. People who had driven that same route the night before came forward to confirm that they had seen a man speaking to the driver of a panel truck stopped on the highway. Mrs. Frank Huggins and her 2 children had reportedly stopped their own car and watched the object soar low over the highway minutes after Woody watched it depart. Another young man said the object had frightened him out of its wits. When it hovered over his car and flashed a powerful, blinding light on him, Woodrow Derenberger became a super celebrity. Crowds of people gathered at his farm every night, hoping to get a glimpse of a spaceship. His phone rang day and night. He switched to an unlisted number, but within a short time the calls began again. Crank calls, threatening him if he didn't shut up, quote unquote. Calls that consisted of nothing except eerie electronic sounds and code-like beeps. Mr. Cold kept his promise. He returned. So that right there is the genuine first encounter of Woodrow Derenberger with Mr. Indrid Cold. Who is this Indrid Cold? I don't know. Some tall, pale, or not pale, but tan man. The movies lied to you. They describe him as a pale, they almost try to tie him into the Grinning Man. I don't know if you guys know about that. The Grinning Man. Perhaps if you hit us up in the comments on any of the social platforms which we are on. I gave out the email for the last episode. But let's see if I can get it again for you all. Because I'm told my wife, aka secretary, aka co-host of Conspiracy Corner Podcast, just where she's day shift and I'm third shift. You can hit us up at conspiracycorner138@yahoo.com. conspiracycorner138@yahoo.com. That's our email. You're welcome to send us any letters you choose, but let us know if you want us to make an episode on the Grinning Man, or hit us up in the comments at YouTube. We are also on such platforms as Google Podcast, BitChute, Anchor, Spotify. So hit us up on alternative sites if you're listening from those sites. We enjoy you listening to us. If you're listening to us on Anchor, Spotify, Google Radio, we enjoy that much more because you're actually paying for this podcast and you don't even know it. Because if you sit through the commercial, the ads, we get a penny for each ad. So one day I get a cheeseburger. And I know that don't seem like much, but that makes my day. You see what I'm saying? I do this just out of love. That's it. On November 4th, Derenberger was riding with a coworker on Route 7 outside Parkersburg when he felt a tingling sensation in his forehead. Then thoughts from Mr. Cold began to spring full-blown into his mind. Cold explained that he was from another planet of Lanulos, which was in the galaxy of Ganymede, 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 the galaxy of Ganymede. Lanulos, he said, was very like the Earth, with flora, fauna, and seasons. He was married to a lady named Kimi, Kimi, and had 2 sons. Folks on Lanulos had a life expectancy of 125 to 175 Earth years, which means if this Indrid Cold is still alive right now, if it's a true account, he's still alive. Which is amazing and kind of cool to think if Mothman Prophecies, the movie and or book, is a true story. Indrid Cold is still out there right now and he's still alive. And maybe one day he'll visit you. Who knows what the future brings. Naturally, there was no war, poverty, hunger, or misery on Lanulos. When the transmission was completed, Cold urged Woody to brace himself because withdrawal would be painful. Woody felt a sharp pain in his temple and nearly passed out. 2 weeks later, though, Woody wasn't aware of it. At the time, 2 salesmen visited mineral wells and went from house to house with their wares. They weren't very interested in making sales. At one house, they offered Bibles. At another, hardware. At a third, they were Mormon missionaries from Salem, Oregon. A UFO wave was taking place in Salem at that time during those years. One man was tall, blond, and looked like a Scandinavian. His partner was short and slight, with pointed features and a dark olive complexion. They asked questions about Woody and were particularly interested in opinions on the validity of his alleged contact. And honestly, if you've watched like Mothman Prophecies, which I loaned my copy out of the movie, so shout out to Mr. R. I don't know, I have to come up with an alias for you when I'm speaking to you through the radio waves, aka internet waves. I'll call you Mr. R Rated. So Mr. R Rated, you have a copy of the DVD, but if anyone listening has watched the film, that's the scene where they got a little over-exaggerated and a little Hollywood excited and got into where Mr. Woodrow Derenberger pulled into the TNT site, which me and Sammy, Team Spectre, have not investigated just fully yet. When we went to Point Pleasant, which I'll try to put a link on the video and or to where you can click on it towards the end of this podcast. Our investigation of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. We went to the memorial. We went to the museum. We went to the statue in the main square. But we did not have time, honestly, for the TNT site because it's like a 3.5 hour drive, dude, from Kentucky. So, yeah, fun. But the movie kind of changed a lot. But it did from listening to a current, well, not current, but something that I've been listening to currently, an Art Bell uh, radio broadcast of an interview with John A. Keel, and he actually approved of the movie. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's just a little bit of trying to dissect the truth from fiction. Um, Not even so much fiction, but over exaggeration, and Hollywood in general likes to over dramatize, I guess. So I'm giving you the true story right now, so I hope you enjoy. And here is another fragment from John A. Keel. Mr. Kevin D. and his NICAP subcommittee urged Woodrow Derenberger to submit to a psychiatric and medical examination. In early December, Woody voluntarily entered St. Joseph's Hospital in Parkersburg and underwent hours of tests administered by Dr. Morgan. I have changed his name here for reasons that will become obvious later on if you're reading the book Mothman Prophecies by John A. Keel. I'm taking fragments. A leading local psychiatrist and Peter Vallardi, an EEG technician, in his final report, Dr. Morgan stated, quote unquote, there was no evidence of abnormalities at all. Subsequently, a report and interpretation was obtained from Baltimore, and the report indicated no abnormalities at all. It was a perfectly normal electroencephalogram. An electroencephalogram, spelt ELECTROENCEPHALO gram, GRAM. There was no evidence of organic brain damage or of seizure disorders. We were particularly concerned about epilepsy, and there was no evidence of this. The record was a normal record with no indication of any central nervous system pathology at all. There was no evidence of any psychiatric disorders. I submitted a report to the Pittsburgh subcommittee of NICAP of the psychiatric examination of Mr. Derenberger, in which I stated that I could find no evidence of mental disorder. There was no indication of any lower pathology. I found Mr. Derenberger to be normal. Quote unquote. The NICAP investigators sent the medical records on to the Washington office of the organization along with the detailed reports on Woody's encounter and his personal background. Typically, the NICAP newsletter later devoted a couple of paragraphs to the Derenberger case, denouncing it as a hoax, misspelling Woody's name and referring to Cold as Kuld, quote unquote. Woody had spelled the name throughout the subcommittee's documents. However, NICAP arrived at K-U-L-D, misspelling it as a mystery in itself. Sounds like sabotage. What did Beastie Boys say? Listen all y'all, it's sabotage. Listen all y'all, it's sabotage. Yeah, I know. I'm a '90s Florida skater kid. I love Beastie Boys, man. All right, so here we go. After Woody's contact became widely known, two gentlemen dropped into the appliance store where he worked and walked directly up to him. "We think you know who we are, Mr. Derenberger," they said flatly. "We'd advise you to forget all about what you've seen." They left as abruptly as they arrived. Woodley described them as being short, stocky, dressed in black suits, and having olive complexions. For some reason, he concluded the men in black were really from the mafia. No matter where... Well, I could see that, though, honestly. I know Mr. John A. Keel describes it for some reason, but they dress like the mafia, you know. And I heard recently, listening to an Art Bell radio broadcast, that apparently the FBI, because Mr. John A. Keel did work for the government at some point, he found out that the FBI, through research, because he was a journalist, found out that apparently they had a dress code back in the day. So a lot of these Men in Black encounters are actually just FBI, you know. Because back in the day they had a dress code and they stuck out like a sore thumb, so they caught on and was like, hey, we can't dress like this anymore because we as people, and I'm playing devil's advocate, created the whole M.I.B, Men in Black, idea, mindset, I guess, you know. Which I will do an episode on that, because one of my fans has requested a podcast episode strictly on Men in Black, and I am planning it. I am planning it, honey. It will come out. I promise you that. You guys come first, you know. This is a love project, though. They left as abruptly as they'd arrived. Woody described them as being short, stocky, and dressed in... Yeah, okay. Yeah. No matter where he moved, and he moved several times in 1967, the phone pranksters and black Cadillacs managed to find him, he claims. Meanwhile, his pretty young wife and their two children also met Indrid Cold and his colleagues from the planet Lanlulos. Mrs. Derenberger was frightened of them and felt that they were engaged in something evil. They were just like us, she told me, traveled about in ordinary automobiles, and were probably infiltrating the human race in large numbers. Woodrow Derenberger's story troubled me from the outset, and for many reasons. It did not fit the mold of usual UFO contact tale. While the telepathy element was common enough, the total physicality of his experiences seemed too real. They defied easy classification and would not fit into any of the pigeonholes I had constructed. Either he was the world's most convincing liar and had somehow trained his wife, children, and friends to back up his lies, or he had a very special set of experience beyond the limits of ufology. By March 1967, the crowds had given up in discouragement, and Mr. Cold was able to safely land his spaceship on Woody's farm. Yeah, you will not find this in the movie, by the way, so I'm giving you some good shit. Hollywood, we already know, is like a declassification system, if not a predictive programming system, but they're not going to actually tell you this shit. You got to pick up these books, man. You've got to pick up these books and read them. I know it sucks, but hey, COVID-19's going on, so you could sit down and read. So read it. It gets crazy. Woody went abroad, according to his story, and took a flight all the way to Brazil and back. The interior of the spaceship was disappointingly normal, with bunks and equipment of obvious terrestrial manufacturer. Later that year, Darren Berger would be flown to Lanulos, a pleasant little planet where the people ran around nearly nude. Sounds like ancient Egypt. Most contactees who claim to have visited other planets, and there are many, usually described a futuristic world. Well, I don't know about that. I've been looking into this, and I wouldn't say all of them did. There was something mundane about Woody's descriptions of the nudist colony in outer space. Too mundane. In his later adventures, Woody usually met the spaceships in some isolated spot, often near a highway under construction. A seemingly trivial detail, yet one that is most significant. Cold, or one of his partners, would pick Woody up in a Volkswagen and drive him to the rendezvous point. His world was now thickly populated with space people named Kemi, K-E-M-I, Clinel, C-L-I-N-N-E-L, Demo, D-E-M-O, Ardo, A-R-D-O, Cleta, K-L-E-T-A-W, etc. They assumed real personalities and were very real to him. But I knew that in most UFO contacts, the entities used names adopted from ancient Greek and from mythology. So I was puzzled by these quote-unquote fairy names. However, many of Woody's experiences have definite fairy tale overtones. So now we're getting into the whole concept of, are these alien abductions connected with fairy, the fae folk? Everything ties together, I promise you that. If I've never preached anything more on this channel, everything ties together. And hopefully I show you if you stick around and you listen. If you don't know. I just hope you enjoy it in general. If anything, I'm not saying it's real, I'm not saying it's fake, just have a good time listening. However, many of Woody's experiences have definite fairy tale overtones, and two of his friends had a classic fairy tale experience. A young man named Jim Hackett and his cousin Darla Sartor were out skywatching at a place called Bogle Ridge one night when they saw a group of red, green, and white lights descend from the sky and drop into a gully close into their position. A moment later there was a bright flash, and Jim felt his face tingling, like a mild electric shock. Then he heard voices outside the car, voices which Darla could not hear. Suddenly there was a sharp rap on the window, causing the pair to jump with alarm. A man holding some kind of red light stood outside the car, and Hackett received a mental message to get out of the car. "Is she your wife?" the man asked. "No, she's my cousin." The man told him to tell Darla to stay in the car. Then he led young Hackett off into the darkness. When he returned, his shoes, socks, and watch were missing. He said the man had taken them. It would be raining, and the ground was muddy to his shoes, had been coated with mud and water. Jim and Darla visited Woody the next day, and the contactee accompanied them to the same spot on Bogle Ridge that night. Indrid Cold, Carl, Ardo, and Demo, Hassan, and the spaceman said Hackett had encountered humanoids, quote unquote, who were no good thieves. He was lucky he had the culprits down to recover the items they promised. The next morning, when Jim stepped out of his door to pick up his morning paper, he was surprised to find his shoes, now neatly shined, sitting on the step, with the laundered socks and the watch inside. The contactee lore is filled with silly episodes like this. The entities serve as good guys and bad guys alternatively. Phantom muggers can be materialized out of darkness and attack the contactee with baseball bats, only to be thwarted by the sudden arrival of the good guys who beat them up and cart off their carcasses. And the baseball bats and any other evidence, many of our black-suited silencers, quote unquote, are engaged in similar games. This book is odd. This podcast is odd. I hope you buckled up, and I hope you hang on tight.
We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.